Ooh, hello and welcome back to 1874. It's time for another podcast episode as Gregg Evans from The Athletic and myself, Dan Bardell, will look back over Spurs 4, Aston Villa 1. Can't say I'm massively looking forward to this one. This show is sponsored by NordVPN, and if you want to get a huge discount and 4 months free even, just go to 1874.io/NordVPN. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So just go and check that offer out if you think NordVPN can help you, and we'll hear a little bit more about them later on in the show. Greg, just as we were coming on, I looked surprised, but I was actually laughing. I heard like what sounded like a 1990s mobile phone in the background. Was that your end?
Yeah, that's in my kitchen. That's my so we've got like a little steering wheel on the fridge, and it's got all these little buttons on, and it just keeps my son entertained when either myself or my wife are doing the cooking. So he always comes in and just presses all the buttons. So yeah, there's some mad noises that you might hear in the background.
I thought you'd gone back to like the 1990 days and were contacting people via like a big old Motorola phone or a BT Cellnet phone there, or we were in an episode of Trigger Happy TV. I wasn't sure which one, but good to say. I'm glad someone's having a nice time, Greg, because quite frankly, I didn't have a nice time yesterday watching Aston Villa Football Club.
No, and I think every supporter that went to the stadium as well would have been extremely frustrated, and everybody watching on as well. It hasn't really gone too well against Tottenham, has it? The last 2 games, that's 8 goals conceded, 1 goal scored. Look, a dreadful result. Let's not dress it up in any other way. That was really, really poor from Villa. Performance pretty bad as well. I just think the bigger picture there, the fact that same points as Arsenal at the start of the season after 10 games, it's a pretty good start still. It just feels like Villa do need a bit of a refresh and a refocus, because 1 win in 5 Premier League games is not the type of results that Villa want.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I was tweeting after the game yesterday, and look, I think it was bad. So I went on Twitter and said it was bad, and had a lot of people kind of say to me, "Oh, bigger picture, top of the Champions League. Look at this, look at that." That's all brilliant, and I say it's brilliant every single week, and I wax lyrical about this squad and this manager all the time. But it's right to call out when a performance is bad, and I got to be honest, I thought 4-1 results, games like that, I thought Villa had moved on from that. I thought Villa had moved away from that, Greg. But some bad habits crept kind of in yesterday, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't enjoy watching the Villa performance at all from a Villa point of view. There wasn't really much to like about it. Even when Villa scored the goal, it felt like it was against the run of play. Not that
I thought the first half was good.
Not that they didn't deserve it. I think that would be wrong to say, because when the game's even like that, it can go anywhere. But I just think that Tottenham had shown more going forward. They just looked a little bit stronger. I think a bit more organised. I mean, okay, Villa sat back and got bodies behind the ball, and that's what they've done previously in games against Tottenham at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, because that method's worked. And this group of players, the majority of them anyway, have been with Unai Emery, so they would have understood the game plan the first time they played Tottenham, and then the second time, and it's worked previously. But this time it just didn't. The second half performance was, they just unravelled. I mean, we can dig out individuals as much as we like, but I just think collectively Villa were poor. I think Pau Torres had his worst game in a Villa shirt. I think Onana's form dropped off a cliff in the second half. The ball just wasn't really sticking with Watkins, and the couple of chances that he had to run at the defenders, he didn't make the most of them. Rodgers going off when clearly he didn't want to, perhaps changed the real rhythm of the game, because Duran just didn't follow instructions again from what I could see. And yeah, Villa were just pulled apart too often. And look, we know that Tottenham can go and do that against teams, because every team that they play against, they're always going to go and create chances, because that's the style that they play. And look at the third goal, Solanke's second. That's a typical Tottenham throwing players forward, and how they're going to get goals like that. That overload is how they play, and if the opposition is not on it, they're going to get punished. And Villa just felt like they were just so ragged.
Yeah, it did just completely get away from this in the second half. I suppose if let's go back to the first half, you're right to call out the way Villa have played in the last 2 seasons under Emery there, and the fact that they look a little bit at times, perhaps, especially in the game last season, but ultimately the way they played, the way they were drilled, that got them the result. Spurs would have probably expected Villa to play in that way, but I did feel they did a lot right in the first half. They did create chances in transition. They did carry a threat from set pieces. You mentioned Onana in the second half. I thought in the first half he was having an absolutely brilliant game. He was doing everything you'd want your number 6 to do in terms of defensive work. He was covering big spaces, getting himself back, intercepting, tackling. He carried a threat, nearly scored, obviously, in the first half as well. So I thought he was brilliant in the first half. It's just the second half, like you say, without singling anyone out, everyone fell off a cliff. I guess great goal, and it was against the run of play, but set pieces, you fancy that Villa might have some joy from set pieces against Tottenham, and especially against Vicario, because for me, he just never ever looks comfortable from set players, corners, free kicks. Vicario.
No, he doesn't, and Tottenham were without their key defender as well, and their top 2 defenders after 60 minutes when Romero went off. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite disappointing that Villa weren't able to really hurt Tottenham a bit more often with their makeshift sort of back line. And yeah, Vicario, he has his strengths. Obviously, I don't think coming for corners and free kicks are one of those of his. Villa very, very creative from set pieces, as we know. They've scored the most goals from set pieces already this season. So they're always going to be a threat. Tottenham do tend to struggle a little bit, and yeah, I think that was a great opportunity. I think what we are seeing now with Onana is a real threat as well in set piece opportunities. It really makes the defenders wary and cautious of him, and that frees up opportunities for others. I think he was having a bit of a tussle with one of the centre halves, wasn't he, during the goal and in the build up to the goal. So Villa have a clear plan at set pieces to sort of ruffle a few feathers, and yeah, they got in the lead, and they should have done better from there.
Yeah, 3 away games, in a row for Morgan Rogers. Every time I talk about Morgan Rogers, I come so close to saying Brendan Rodgers, and I don't know why. It really annoys me. In my head, I nearly say Brendan Rodgers so many times, but no, it isn't Brendan Rodgers playing as number 10 for Villa. It is Morgan Rogers. He scored three in a row now, back-to-back away games. I guess that's one positive that we can take, because he was playing well at the start of the season without kind of getting his rewards in terms of goals and assists, but that seems to be behind him now.
Yeah, and it's a strange one, isn't it? Because his form probably hasn't been as good during the goal scoring performances yet. His form was excellent before, and he wasn't scoring. So, look, he's an attacking player. He wants to score goals and set up goals. He's had a good start to the season. I think I just like the fact that Villa have got 3 English sort of attacking players in Watkins, Ramsey, and Rodgers in that forward sort of line area. It's not many teams are there in the Premier League that have that. So yeah, good for Rodgers. I just think he would have been disappointed at coming off. I mean, I don't know how serious his setback was, but he looked like he didn't want to come off.
It looked bad at the time, didn't it? Like he was down for a long time. He didn't look like he was moving well, but I think he wanted to give it a go. But I think it looked like Villa reacted to what they were saying, and the physio's in communication with the bench, so I'm presuming the physio said he can't continue.
Yeah,
Rodgers looked confused by that and wanted to obviously run it off, give it a go. Ultimately, it didn't happen, and Duran came on. You just referenced Ramsey there. I thought he was good in the first half. He's such a unique dribbler. The way he carries the ball, he's not going to do you with skills and flicks and tricks, but just his close control and the way he does carry the ball. I thought he had a good first half as well.
Yeah, better. Similar to a couple of weeks ago when I said just the end product wasn't quite there in terms of a couple of crosses that just went a little bit wayward. If you get into those brilliant positions, you want to then put the final ball across. I mean, look at Richarlison. He got into that brilliant position right to the byline and then put the perfect cross across for Solanke to score. That's what you want from Ramsey, just a little bit more. Just get that finishing touch there, because that's ultimately what's going to define and separate him from the best, really.
I guess we're not getting that at the moment from maybe the players playing on the left and on the right, because Bailey's toiling a little bit at the moment. It's not going well for him. Philogene, I'm not digging him out at all because he's young. He's getting used to playing in the Premier League. It's tough, but I'm not seeing the same player that I saw at Hull in terms of confidence running with the ball. I think he's playing a little bit safe. McGinn obviously isn't that type of player playing the right hand side. He's doing the job that he's told to do, playing kind of more narrow. But Ran, you're right on Ramsey's end product. That's been a big source of goals for Villa over the 2 years under Emery, those kind of wide players coming in and making stuff happen. I guess Luca Dean is providing a lot still from left back. He put the corner in, I believe, yesterday. He looks dangerous, put a lovely cross in the first half as well. He's providing. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we're not looking quite as creative in those positions as we have done previously over the last 2 years.
No, certainly not. And I do think, when the absence of Diaby, although he wasn't excellent last season, I do think he played a really big part in Villa's season. Played so often, he wore defenders down. He opened up the opportunities for Bailey when he came on because defenders were tired. And look, with all due respect to Philogene, he's just not quite as good as Diaby yet. So, that is a little bit of a drop off for Villa in that area. They clearly need a little bit more from the other players to get them onto that next level. Ian Matson's potentially a player that could play a little bit more advanced in the times ahead if needed. I think he's the most used substitute in the Premier League. Typically we tend to see him coming on for Digne, don't we? And then he gets forward, and I believe Digne is a better defender than Matson, but Matson maybe offers more with his sort of pace and running ability. So look, there are options for Villa, but I think they need to start getting towards an area where they're finding their strongest team now. Because I still don't believe that we fully know it, and I just think that might be causing them a few issues.
Yeah, I'm thinking at the moment, if we're going to score a goal, unless it's coming from something that Rodgers has done in build-up play, or Luca Dean putting a cross in, or from a set piece generally, we just aren't looking as dangerous. Bailey to Watkins was such a source of goals for Villa last year. Bailey made so much happen in terms of goals and assists. Diaby, you think of the goals and the assists that he scored, as well as you've just rightly mentioned. If you take them out, that's a lot of output gone. And that neither of those things are there at the moment.
Yeah, it's a massive thing, Like Bailey was in great form last season, but he didn't start that many games. Also, did he? He made a lot. Half of the season, he made a lot of impact off the bench. So, two real strong players coming off the bench, coming in and out of the team there. And Villa just haven't quite got that at the moment. Philogene he probably needs a run of games, doesn't he, to get him going, really? And is he going to get that? It's unlikely because, there are other players ahead of him. So, yeah, discussing this sort of privately with people around the summer, the summer business, it was always a bit risky letting Diaby go because you are effectively weakening the team.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the start of the season, I didn't think about it too much. I thought it was an opportunity that Villa couldn't really pass up because I don't think he was going to be in Villa's best 11 because I think they had Rodgers earmarked for playing in that number 10 position, and Emery didn't really use him wide right last season many times, maybe a handful of times at best. So it was one I was kind of for, but it's easy, with hindsight now, I do look at it and I wasn't expecting Bailey to struggle at the start of the season as much as he has. I think if he hasn't been struggling as much, and you've then got Rodgers in that number 10, I think it's all knitting together a little bit nicer, but it's kind of not knitting together at the moment, is it? And you start the second half, you 1-0 up. It's one of my least favourite things in football when you concede straight after or right before halftime. To concede 3 minutes into the second half, it's like the worst thing you can do, because if you go 10-15 minutes in that second half, you kind of keep it tight, do what you've done in the first half. I fully believe that stadium becomes a more difficult place for the Tottenham players to play. Instead, they get the goal, the players get the tails up, the fans get behind them, and that just completely changes the game.
Yeah, and you're right. The longer it would have gone on, the more frustrated and tense the Tottenham supporters would have got. But they were right behind them, weren't they? Straight after that goal,
yeah.
And all of a sudden, the atmosphere in the stadium changes. That they've got the momentum with them, and they go on. Similar with Liverpool against Brighton at the weekend, 1-0 up, and Brighton were 1-0 up at Anfield. Liverpool get a quick goal and then go and score a second straight after. perhaps might have been the same with Manchester City at Bournemouth. If Manchester City had got a goal a little bit earlier, things might have changed for them, albeit the other way around in terms of they were the away team. But yeah, I just think that, I mean, look, there's no good time to concede, is there?
No,
You can't if you're 1-0 up and you concede at any point, you've automatically thrown away your advantage. So there's no good time. And Villa are strong enough, well drilled enough, experienced enough now to have tightened up after that goal, I think, and just try to not so much hold on to what they've got, but just protect that score for a little bit longer and then see if they could move on further. But it just felt like they crumbled a little bit. The press didn't seem like it was as efficient as previously. Villa don't press that often, we know that, and we don't press that high. But it was just. It's hard to dig them out because they've done so well previously. But if we're just looking at this game in isolation, it was disappointing. It felt like they didn't work as hard as we have seen previously. And I'm going back to Onana, but I just felt like he was a completely different player in the second half compared to the first. And the longer the game went on, and I know he came on after about 80 minutes anyway, I just thought Villa have got to start finding a way to get Kamara back in this team, because that is the player that will stop those breaks forward. And blimey, Torres can't play like that ever again, else he will lose his place very soon.
I mean, look, nothing we talk about here takes away from how good Villa are. They're a brilliant football team. But
it's the individual game, isn't it? Yeah. I'm trying to be balanced and fair.
No, I know you are. You're doing a good job of it.
There's a lot to like about Villa, this season under Unai Emery. Emery's a fantastic manager. Everybody knows that. The players that Villa have got there are exceptional now. This for many people, including yourself, Dan, is probably the best Villa team that you've seen for in your life almost. And it's unfair to criticise them too much after one defeat, but there is no way to dress up yesterday nicely. It was very, very poor.
Yeah, and you've got to try and unpick a game. Otherwise, there's no point doing a podcast. There's no point doing, talking about football, is there? Literally, if you're just going to say everything's good, I can't say everything's good after a 4-1 defeat. And people on social media didn't seem to understand that yesterday, just because I didn't back up post by saying how brilliant we are generally. I'm just talking about the game. It wasn't good. It lost 4-1. How can I say a 4-1 defeat is a good thing? It just isn't. Love that after all these years, Greg, a bit of we creeping into your dialogue.
Actually mean
that. No, love, absolutely love that from you, Greg. Good to say after all these years. Someone who comes under the microscope quite a lot is Matty Cash, and I would defend him to death in all honesty, because I do think most of the time Villa are a better team with him in it. I do think there's games where you like to have Conser at right back, and that has definitely worked in big games in the past. Villa looked worse when he went off yesterday. I know he was kind of, the goal came from down his side with Son running at him. That can happen. But generally, and a few people have said it in the chat as well, but when Cash went off and we had to reorganise that defence, that wasn't a good thing for us at all.
Yeah, it got worse. It messed up the balance of the team a little bit. Carlos coming off the bench isn't as good as Carlos starting games. From what I've experienced. And I mean, we've seen when Cash doesn't play that the youngsters aren't quite as good as him yet. Bogard, who admittedly isn't a right back, and Nedeljkovic aren't quite there at the level of Cash. So the players that Villa have got available to them, Cash is the strongest right back. I do think he offers a good balance. Yeah, there were moments in the game yesterday and moments across the season where he hasn't been at the high standard that he usually sets, but that's the same with pretty much any player. I do think that his absence made Villa worse yesterday, and you look at the goals they conceded after.
Yeah, Joe in the comments is saying Cash had Son largely under control. I would agree with that. I didn't notice Son too much in the first half, but one concern I do have with Cash now, does seem to be becoming a little bit injury prone. Greg, back end of last season, start of this season, gone off again yesterday. That's becoming a little bit of a concern, isn't it? That he can't seem to stay fit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Bailey in some ways, isn't it? You feel like these little niggles are creeping in, and how serious are the niggles? Because how much does it reduce the amount of training that the player can have then? And then is he a little bit behind in terms of preparation on some others? You don't know exactly what goes on at Bodymore Heath day to day, but it feels like that right side has just been a little bit disrupted by injuries this season. Cash and Bailey, yeah, I certainly agree. But it's difficult, isn't it? It's hard to maintain fitness when you're playing so many games, when you're rolled out so often, high intensity games, high pressure games as well. I think ever since Cash has come, he's been pretty durable for Villa. He's played a lot of games, and I mean he's certainly been worth the money that they invested in him.
Yeah, I mean, and let's talk about that second goal. So Solanke didn't look like a player that was low on confidence with that little dinked finish over Emi Martinez for Spurs' his second. But this is where I think the disruption and having to change the back line, Konsa is keeping him on side basically. From right back, he's too deep compared to the rest of the back line. And again, I've said there's games where he's come in and played right back, and Villa have looked brilliant, and it's really, really worked. When we change it, I do think people will probably look at Carlos a bit more. But I do think when Konsa moves across from centre back to right back, if he's had to move there mid game, I don't think you see the best of him at that point. I think he struggles with that, and Emery will be. They're the little details that Emery will probably be fuming with, because Villa have been so good at the offside trap over the years, but Konsa's got that wrong for that goal.
Slightly, yeah. I mean, he doesn't really want to be there. It's not his position. There are players that have to perform these duties for teams because they're asked. And they're seen as versatile, but he's a centre back. He wants to be a centre back. He knows his best positions there, and it's not great for him to be at right back, but he gets on with it, and so fair play in some ways. But I think you got to look at the bigger picture. It's not so much Konsa's fault for the second goal. I think Onana's way too high up. He's lost one of the midfielders that were running through. Torres is engaged, and that's pulled the line further up, and it's just opened them up. It's just a horrible goal to watch. Looks lovely on the eye from Tottenham because they've moved it about neatly, but Villa have been picked apart way too easy there.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the things that disappoints me mainly from the game yesterday is even at 2-1 down, I think, right, well, we can definitely get back into this. Van der Ven's not playing. Romero's gone off injured. I'm thinking there's still a pathway back into this game for Villa, but it just never quite happened. Substitutions arguably probably did make us worse. I think Kamara should have been on earlier. It's easy to say with hindsight, but I think he would have stemmed the flow a little bit. We were struggling in transition in that second half. It was clear for everyone to see. But it got worse, and obviously we conceded more, but we didn't really have anything going forward. Dean and Liz in the comments just asked if Barkley was injured. Yes, he's out for a few weeks. Ross Barkley. He's come on in these kind of, and Villa haven't lost a game away from home until yesterday. He's come on in those kind of games and kind of calmed Villa down and used the ball well, put his foot in when he needed to, cover ground, just done all the things as a number 6 coming on that you'd want them to do. I'm saying about Kamara coming on. I actually think Barkley's been excellent for Villa. Every time he's come on, he's offered something, and that was a miss yesterday as well.
Yeah, 100%. But Barkley's come on and he's a finisher type, player now, isn't he? Somebody that comes out and helps close out the game. And look, I think I have to go through the games, but I think a couple of times Villa have been behind when he's come on, really, and then they've gone on to win the game. So, Villa are the team who have picked up the most points, the second most points from losing positions. I think Manchester City have picked up the most. So that's a real good sign, because it means that when Villa go behind, they're never out of the game, and that gives supporters so much hope and encouragement. And when the game's at Villa Park as well, it's even more beneficial, because the fans don't fall away and expect to lose. There's almost an expectancy to get back into the game. So yeah, even at 2-1 yesterday, albeit away from home and with a very pumped up home support in favour of Tottenham, there was a chance for Villa there, but they couldn't seem to find it. Kamara, I understand why he perhaps came on a little bit late. He did play 90 minutes against Crystal Palace, and it was his first or second game back. And you really have to be careful with players who have been out for so long. You don't want to overload them. I think Ange Postecoglou said that one of the reasons that Son was withdrawn before half an hour was because he picked up an injury after the 60-minute mark last time he was injured, and stayed on for a little bit too long. So you've got to be really careful with players and protect them. Don't want to overload Kamara because he's going to be really important. But yeah, but it felt like a day where Barkley might have made a difference.
Yeah, real shame for him to not be there, especially his confidence is probably high after getting off the mark the week before. He probably would have played in the Carabao Cup game, which we'll come on to in a little bit. He'd have played in that as well. I suspect third goal, I think we can probably put down to Pau Torres, who we've already said had a pretty difficult day in the Villa battle, and really a difficult second half.
Yeah,
We're talking about subs coming on and like impacting the game. Talking about Barkley has come on and impacted games. Duran has come on and scored countless goals this season and changed things for us. None of the subs really worked yesterday, did they? No. Duran, I barely remember him touching the ball in that second half when he came on for Rodgers, Gregg.
Yeah, he unfortunately didn't have an impact. We've seen he is the most used substitute in the Premier League, and has been excellent for Villa, coming off the bench, scoring lots of goals. So we can't knock him too much. But on a day like yesterday, he didn't make an impact. I didn't think Watkins had much of an impact during the game anyway. So something really needed to change in terms of the forward players getting more of the ball, and it just wasn't it? It was going the other way. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't he, with Duran, because he's such a goal threat and he's such an impact in the attacking third. But you do have to sacrifice a fair bit with him because he doesn't give you as much as the other players do tactically. I think he's just still learning a little bit. We'll get onto the fourth goal, but it was pretty sloppy of him to turn his back, in the wall and just give Maddison a much easier attempt at goal. And look, Emi Martinez is never going to get anywhere near that free kick because he won't see it almost until it's in the net because of what the wall should be doing. So yeah, I mentioned it last week. It's just a little bit difficult for Duran to take on these tactical instructions. He's not quite at the level of others yet. I think he's come out and said in the week, didn't he? He's had a fair few problems with Emery. He likes the way that he's teaching him constantly, but it's not all been rosy so far. So yeah, it's a little bit of a learning curve for him. And just highlights, I think, why we don't see him starting too many games in the Premier League, because he's still developing.
Yeah, you have to play Watkins. I'm afraid, just for that. We spoke about it a lot at the end of the Bournemouth podcast we did last week. You absolutely have to start Watkins because of the other things, not just the pure goals. And Watkins scores a lot of goals as well. It's tactically and what he offers the team. He just offers way more. Unfortunately for Duran, and Emery will see that, and that's why in the Premier League and the big games, that is why Watkins starts. Interesting for the fourth goal, because I hadn't really looked at it as being Duran's fault until you text me in the evening. I actually just thought the wall was very misplaced. Not for me to tell Emi Martinez what to do at all, but it didn't feel far enough over to me. It looked like a bad wall all round.
Yeah, I think so. Villa worked really hard on their organisation at defensive and attacking set pieces, and look at all phases of the game. So I don't think it's a preparation thing so much. I just think it's quite unusual to have a free kick so close to the penalty area, isn't it? So perhaps they haven't faced that often, that much very often. But yeah, I'll have to go back through it. But for me, it looked like rather than Duran just jumping straight up to try and gain more height in the wall and make it harder for Maddison to get it over the wall, he just turned his body.
Yeah.
And it just opened up that little bit of space that allowed Maddison to bend it round. And then look, there is just no way that Martinez will get anywhere near it because he's not going to see it late. And the job of the wall is to either block the shot or make it more difficult for the attacker to get an eye at goal. But the way Duran twisted his body, it just made it easier for him.
Yeah, we'll unpick. We'll come up with our conclusions from the game in a second, and we'll also talk a little bit about we have to talk about Villa have thrown the Carabao Cup and then gone and lost the next game, so we have to talk about that. But before we do, let's hear a little bit more about NordVPN. 1874 is proudly sponsored by NordVPN, so when and you can't watch it, we want to help you. NordVPN is a secure and private service which works on pretty much any device, including your laptop, mobile, television. So if you want to watch some live content, it allows you to appear like you're in another country. And whilst you're connected, no one else can find out what you're doing, including your internet service provider. Beyond this, the service also has threat protection baked in to protect you from intrusive website ads and malware, which is pretty handy for you. As part of NordVPN support performance for free, this also includes Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. All you've got to do is go to 1874.io/NordVPN and sign up. All the details are also in the description. As always, we're very grateful to anyone that signs up. We know that money is tight, but if you think NordVPN will help you out, it will also help keep the channel running and help. Not a huge fan of those little boxes when we're when the NordVPN ad is running, Greg. I can't remember from last week whether or not people can see us or not in the little boxes, but you will have seen me having my water intake during the NordVPN ad break. So if you think NordVPN can help you, go and check out what they can do. All the information is in the description on YouTube and also wherever you're getting this if you're listening via audio. Right then, Greg. So overall, I think it's important to say that Villa are still in a very healthy position. I think up until this weekend, it had been a better start than last season. It's important to say that it's hugely unlikely that off the back of this, the wheels are going to fall off at Villa. It just doesn't happen under Unai Emery. And there's also just a high probability that they'll bounce back from this and go and beat Bruges on Wednesday to make it 4-4 in the Champions League, which is incredible.
Yeah, and yeah, it would be incredible to win 4 out of 4. But it's hard, isn't it? Because Villa have done a lot of the hard work already in the Champions League, and the Bruges game now is not as important as the game that they've just played against Tottenham. So if they could have picked which one to take 3 points from, it would have been the Tottenham game, I think, purely because of the points that they've already picked up in the Champions League. So going to Bruges now and winning will not make up for losing at Tottenham. It will just, help the Champions League campaign, of course. But yeah, look, not sounding like a manager here. The next, a boring old cliche that they always roll out, the next game is the most important now, isn't it? And there needs to be some sort of reaction. I think it's going to be really tough for Villa because 3 away games in the space of 6 days is not ideal. Nope. There's going to be lots of travelling, lots of team meetings, before games, not much training time. So what went wrong on Sunday, there won't be much time to really fix that, either ahead of Tuesday or Saturday. And Saturday night at Anfield is going to be a really tough game because other than Manchester City, who I still do think are the strongest team in the Premier League, although not so much with some of their injuries they've got at the moment, Liverpool are the next best team. And that's going to be a tough game because Liverpool have won 13 out of 15 games this season under Arne Slot and are flying. So Villa have got a really difficult week. They've got some tough games after that as well, with Chelsea not far away, are they? Is that right? Yeah. And sorry, I can't remember the other game. But the next 4 or 5 games are
Palace, I think.
Palace, that's it. Yeah, pretty tough. Are we looking back at the Carabao Cup? Did we say, or we looking ahead?
We did do a show straight after. Jacob and myself did a show the next day, so we don't need to cover it in detail. But I guess I'm really enjoying your football cliches. By the way, take each game as it comes. Greg.
Oh, it's awful. That's awful.
I guess we have to say, when you do essentially throw a cup tie, which is I think what Villa did on Wednesday, you have to back it up with something. Villa have done this in the past, and they've had times where they have backed it up, and they've had times where they haven't. Think of Martin O'Neill, the Moscow debacle. He really needed to back it up, and we didn't, and we threw it away, and we fell down the leg off the back of that. Look, nothing like that is going to happen to Villa. But there will be fans that say, "Well, we rested everyone, and then we had our worst result of the season off the back of it on Sunday." So maybe we should have played our first team. But I actually saw a tweet yesterday, which was an interesting tweet. I thought that Tottenham played a pretty strong side midweek. They're in Europe as well, and they beat Man City. And you could argue that galvanised them going into Sunday, and they've got a result off the back of it. Whereas Villa didn't, and they've lost a bit of momentum, and they've ended up losing the game quite heavily in the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dissect there, and I think this debate could go on and on and on for hours. We could literally get people on, and every person that we spoke to would have a different opinion around the cup competitions and what's most important, etc., etc. First and foremost, I don't think it's anywhere as extreme as the Martin O'Neill throw away,
And
throw
just
away
Graham
in Russia.
Evans talking about Martin O'Neill as well.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not that bad. Look, we knew that the Carabao Cup would be a competition where Villa used some of their fringe players. They simply could not keep playing all of their first team players, first choice players anyway, because the overloads on the players would be too much. And I heard some managers in the week saying, rival team managers saying that they actually thought that the changes that they made the team stronger anyway because of how jaded some of the first choice players would have been. So, look, Villa still had a pretty decent squad, pretty decent starting lineup out. Some very strong, high quality players in that team. I think. Would we have seen that team if they were playing Bayern Munich or another team in the Champions League? Certainly not. So there's the difference. And would Buendia, Bailey and McGinn have been replaced by 3 youngsters in a Champions League game that was of more importance? No. So, yeah, we can say that Emery has, rotated and played some of his younger and fringe team players. I don't think it's fair to say he's thrown it because he hasn't.
No, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And it's also not as simple as you lose in the Carabao Cup. You have to go and win the next Premier League game. I think there's a bigger picture here now. So I put a tweet out on the back of Jacob's article. Jacob wrote about the debate of going out of the cup, and he rightly pointed out that lots of supporters would be frustrated and angry because they want to go and win a cup competition. A bit of justification for this brilliant team, this brilliant manager, something to look back on in years to come. But a lot of supporters that I know that go to games now have had amazing memories of beating Bayern Munich, beating Arsenal twice home and away, beating Manchester City. And, I spoke to a lot of them at length because they're supporters and it means more to them than it does to me as a reporter covering the club. And I asked them, I said, picture the feelings that, let's go back to those emotions that you encountered when you beat Bayern Munich and the other games that I mentioned. How good did you feel after those games? And they said, yeah, it was amazing, brilliant performances. Felt like real justification of how good this team is. And I said, would one day at Wembley winning again, regardless of what it was, would one event at Wembley beat that collective feeling? And they sort of stopped back and thought, actually, you're right. We'd probably be just as happy winning at Wembley. But the performances from some of these Villa players show that there's going to have to be some sort of sacrifice, at some point, because Villa are still building this team. They're not an all-conquering team yet. They haven't got the squad of Manchester City and Arsenal and Liverpool yet. Hopefully in the future they might be able to, but just right now they haven't. So, and look, Man City went out of the League Cup as well, didn't they? So, they're not the only team to fall out of it. So, but I do understand that so many people would have different opinions on this. And you've said to me, year after year after year, just want to win something, Greg. I just want this team to win something.
I have changed that. I would say I've changed that slightly. Certainly 12 months ago, if you'd have offered me 4th or the Conference League, I wanted 4th. So I have kind of changed over the last 12 to 18 months. I would say, because I think we need sustained top 4 finishes. I think that's something that Villa need, constant Champions League football to really help the club grow. I think that's something that they need. But look, I'd love to see us win a trophy. I just wonder whether maybe fans are okay with the Carabao Cup, because most of us have seen Villa win that League Cup. If we do the same again in the FA Cup, is that going to then start to grate, especially when Emery has said, I want to win trophies with this team?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, though, the FA Cup, it becomes even more of a distraction, doesn't it? Because of the time of the year that it arrives. This is when the real business end of the season, almost the second half of the season, where the Champions League games start to become tougher. If Villa make it through to the knockout stages, which I'm sure they will, you're going to have double-header games, which are really, really important. And if you've got an FA Cup games around a Champions League double-header, don't know if that would presume it will coincide at some point. I'm sure it does. That FA Cup game is going to become least relevant, isn't it?
It's tough. Look, if I could choose between the Carabao and the FA Cup, I'd love to see us win win the FA Cup.
And it's not, it's not also that, you know, Villa have had chances to win cup competitions. They were in the final in 2020 when they survived by 1 point. So goal difference, was it, or 1 point? Can't remember.
A couple of 1 or 2 points. I think.
You know, so don't want to go back to that, do you? Finishing 17th and get into a League Cup final. And look, you know, that if you look back at that season, that League Cup final, there was a drop off around league performances because lots of the players were focused on the League Cup final, playing in the final, and you know, the league forms suffered as a result of that. So it's a lazy comparison, I know that, but there's and look, you know, Villa are in a moment where they should be starting to compete more seriously on all fronts. But if you're doing well in the Premier League, same points as Arsenal after 10 games, top of the Champions League table after 3 games, I think it's okay to understand that a Carabao Cup defeat has followed.
Yeah, look, and they've just had a bad result, a bad day, real bad day at the office at Tottenham on Sunday. That can happen. They had bad days at the offices, even in that brilliant start to the season last season. You know, they lost 5-1 to Newcastle on the first day. Liverpool pumped them in September 3-0, but they kind of bounced back, reorganised, especially after that 3-0 Liverpool defeat, and went on a big run. I know it's a little later on in the season now, but I do wonder whether this will galvanise them in some ways. But you literally couldn't wish for a worse game at the moment in the league, going to Anfield Saturday night. Could you? It's literally the last thing that you need at the moment. Greg, a tough game for you as well. I've already heard you call Villa we in this podcast, and you're covering Liverpool now. It's a difficult day at the office for Greg Evans at Anfield, 8 o'clock on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it though. You know, look, I mean, I don't think I've ever covered a 8 o'clock game at Anfield yet. I don't think there has been one, and I wrote an article earlier in the season about just the Anfield atmosphere, and it was actually on the back of a 3 o'clock kickoff against Bournemouth when the atmosphere was just really flat, and it was a hot talking point because a lot of supporters were saying that, you know, they were frustrated with the atmosphere, but there's no way the atmosphere will be flat at an 8 o'clock kickoff against Villa. No, you know, it's a huge game in the Premier League, and the later kickoff makes a big difference. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think it'll be a good game, and I do think Liverpool will be very wary of Villa.
Forest went there and won, didn't they?
Don't think they'll be. Yeah, Forest look a decent team this year, and you know, Brighton put in the best sort of 45-minute performance I've seen from an opposition team against Liverpool this season. In the first half on Saturday, they were excellent and created, you know, 5 or 6 really good chances on the transition as well. You know, building up slowly from the back, working through the midfield, and then quickly attacking. And that's the type of style that Villa can adopt when they're really at it. They'll just need their key players to just be a little bit better than they were yesterday.
Have you ever covered, because you're covering Liverpool now, have you ever covered an opposition team against Villa? Or if you have, it must have been a long time ago that you did that, because you obviously covered Villa for so long. So you're now kind of covering against Villa this weekend. Yeah,
well, I'm not, because I still report on both teams. So
I've definitely seen a heavier Liverpool bias on the Athletic from Gregg Evans in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, Jacob's the main Villa writer now. I'm the main Liverpool writer, but you know, the Athletic, the thing that I've never experienced at any other media company at the Athletic is that we all chip in between us, and you know, there will be times that I'll help Jacob on Villa stories. Jacob will write Southampton stories because of his background, and we all just, you know, we all share everything. So we're very much a team rather than individual reporters, if that makes sense. But no, to answer your question, yeah, I have, because when I worked at the Sunday Mercury, I covered Wolves, West Brom, Blues, and Villa, and that was the season that Blues won the Carling Cup and were relegated. And I think that was the last season that all 4 Midlands teams were in the Premier League. I think I'll have to double check. Yeah, of course it was, because Blues have never come back. So yeah, and it was actually a really fun season as a reporter, because there was an individual reporter for each team, and I got to cover the biggest game of the week. You know, out of the 4 teams. So yeah, I ended up at a lot of Blues games that year because they obviously won the cup, didn't they? So
yeah. Well, and hopefully they never return to the Premier League. When Greg says they've not been there since, hopefully never to return. I just need to shout out someone in the chat. I believe this is called a super chat. So we've been donated 200 INR. I've got to be honest, I don't know what 200 INR is. So thank you to Ricky, but they're a Spurs fan, saying you at the risk of doing what we Spurs used to do, prioritising top positions in place of cup wins. At some point, you'll be pressured, and if you can't win immediately, you start crumbling. There is some comparison to Villa in that Pochettino Spurs, isn't there, with the cups? Because Spurs qualified for the Champions League consistently over a period of 4 or 5 years, if my memory serves me correctly. Had some massive games, did really well, were a really exciting outfit, but ultimately they didn't win a cup. And now, years on, the thing that gets thrown at Spurs is you haven't won anything since 2008. I mean, Villa haven't won anything since 1996, Gregg, and that is, that's bad. I can't dress that up in any other way. A team of Villa size should have won something more recently than 1996.
Yeah, of course they should. And look, Tottenham, they didn't get the justification of that brilliant team that got to the Champions League final and lost to Liverpool and, had a real good run. But I'm sure if you analyse that period, the supporters would have really enjoyed it. And ultimately, that's more important than saying, well, we won a trophy, but, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I do feel, though, as that it just becomes harder and harder. Do you want to be like Manchester United, who finished 12th in the league or whatever, and win the FA Cup? And Eric Ten Hag, the way he was just constantly rolling out the fact that they'd won 2 trophies. But look how unhappy the supporters were. Compare the sentiment between at Old Trafford to Villa Park; it was miles apart.
Yeah, I'd quite like to be like Man City, really, and just win the league and win the Champions League. I'd
be all right.
I'd be quite happy with that.
Give
me that
treble. Treble as well. That'd be quite fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if I could be like anyone, it would probably be them. I would think. But yeah, I definitely don't want to be like Manchester United.
It's just so tough to win competitions now, isn't it? You mentioned that Tottenham team that sort of missed out when they were so good. You look at Liverpool and how close they came to beating Manchester City, and in any other cycle of years, they would have won 3 or 4 titles, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And they've only got that one during the COVID season. And are Villa starting to become this team now? Where they lost in the quarterfinal of the Europa Conference League and should have kicked on
semis, Greg.
Semi-final against Olympiacos. Excuse me, semi-final. So, and then whatever happens this season, we'll see. But I do feel like it's still relatively early days under Emery. I do think that he could be a manager that would stick around for a long time if he knows the future is bright. And there's really ambitious owners at the club, which we know they want to conquer the world. They have done since they took over in 2018. They've backed the club for so long. They're backing Emery. They're giving him everything he wants. And he's an excellent manager who can take this club forward and has the history of winning cups, competitions with lower ranked clubs. Aside from the real elite clubs, he's done it with Sevilla. He's done it with Villarreal. Can he do it with Villa now?
Yeah, and just to finish, I think one of the biggest things here is that we said this last week after the Bournemouth game as well, when Villa got pegged back to draw the game so late on. They're so good now. We've churning out results, just being a brilliant football team. It felt like a disaster in some ways when we drew last week. And Bournemouth have gone on and had some great results since then as well, and before. Obviously beating Manchester City at the weekend. Draws feel like a disaster now. So defeats are certainly going to feel worse than they probably are because we're so used to winning, and it's a feeling that we've not really had in my life.
Yeah. Minus the back end of last season, which after the Europa Conference League exit was pretty poor, but I put that down to a lot of injuries. That you can't really bring that into the consideration. But this season there has been a few disappointing results. The result against Ipswich, the 1-1 draw with Bournemouth, the 0-0 with Man United, and now this very heavy defeat at Tottenham. That Villa are in a bit of a bad run of form at the moment. They're not picking up the points that we expected. Just the recent run has just taken the gloss off the start of the season a little bit. It's just started to even out. So look, it's on the team to get back to winning ways now, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll bounce back and pick up some big results and still have a tremendous season. Right, I think that does us for today then, Greg. You can go back and play with the steering wheel on your fridge if you fancy. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you as always. Thank you for those that have joined us live to have a chat throughout the show, and thank you to everyone that will go on and listen and watch as well. Do all the things I bang on about every single week, like subscribe with your post notifications on YouTube. Leave us a comment as well. We'll try and get back to some people and have have a little chat around Villa. If you're listening via audio platform, just leave a nice review if you can. Give us a 5-star ranking if you can as well. That really helps us. Be back tomorrow with a preview show ahead of Bruges Villa in the Champions League. I don't think I'll ever get used to saying that. Still, that Villa are involved in Champions League fixtures. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring, and as ever, let's finish with a big, massive up the Villa.